Economics is at the forefront of both countries. I'm now joined by the Director of China-Africa Studies at the University of Johannesburg, political analyst David Monyae. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome to the program.
Good afternoon.
You spent 9 years in Zimbabwe, and seeing that last clip where a country like Zimbabwe, previously very well resourced, the subject of some kind of relief and aid is quite telling. Indeed.
It's a sad story to see a country that was once the greatest country when it comes to agriculture. It used to feed the entire Southern Africa. It was leading, helping Mozambique, helping Zambia on the other hand. But to date, it appears that poorer countries than Zimbabwe, Zambia, is now having an upper hand and to some extent helping Zimbabwe. And it's a sad turn of events that has to deal with mainly leadership, internal Zimbabwe, and broadly speaking, not just government, even the opposition. It appears that all systems in Zimbabwe at the moment, at the political level, is down. There isn't any strong, sound leadership that could take the country out of the crisis.
Talk to us about this binational commission. And I listened to President Ramaphosa, and he's choosing his words carefully. Zimbabwe definitely looking for some kind of concrete help, even cash perhaps, loans, whatever. But the language and the tone that President Ramaphosa has taken, very similar to Botswana, where we want to help, but right now we just can't give cash.
I think the reason has to do with internal Zimbabwean politics. Things are not quite clear. Without inter-party ZANU-PF MDC agreement on concrete issues and working towards a common position on how to resolve almost a decade and a half crisis, I think it limits regional powers, regional neighbors to come in with a meaningful injection. And the other factor is that when you look at the Botswana, for instance, the new president, Sisi, he has to really wait and see the situation. South Africa is facing its own domestic issues. The economy is not growing that much, and it's also going for elections. And no president will make any meaningful announcements on foreign issues while confronted with the really tough elections coming in May.
So a great gathering. I suppose it was scheduled, but the timing perhaps is what's difficult.
Indeed. And the international community is not helping. I think there has been some promising signals in the early days of the so-called change in Zimbabwe from President Robert Mugabe to President Mnangagwa. However, Britain and the United States appear to be pulling out, given the fact that there has been violence on the ground, the military used excessive force to deal with civilians, and on the other hand, the opposition is wasting time on the streets. There is absolutely nothing to sanction in Zimbabwe. Therefore, the international community is not going to win, nor will the military use massive force on the ground. They're not going to win, and it really depends on the leadership in both parties to come to senses and realize that Zimbabwe at this stage needs no one else other than Zimbabweans themselves to come with clear signals for the international community to pour in assistance as well as investments on key issues dealing with the bottlenecks in the infrastructure, agriculture, a revival of the agriculture sector, minerals, and there are quite a number of minerals that are useful for Zimbabwe, platinum, and there are talks of oil discovery in Zimbabwe. So all factors are there. Human capital is one of the best on the African continent. All what is lacking is a clear leadership, which is a really sad story.
But some people would say, hang on, this country had democratic elections. The majority of Zimbabweans chose President Mnangagwa as their leader and overwhelmingly chose ZANU-PF as the party to govern. So what's the problem?
I think the problem has to do with people who agreed, both MDC and ZANU-PF, to go for the elections. And post-elections, the opposition with really genuine concerns, but the manner in which they are responding does not speak to issues of confidence building, where the opposition accepts parliamentary elections and refusing to accept the presidential elections. And that's a contradiction. While the government, on the other hand, needed really to rebrand ZANU-PF after the coup of last year, military coup that is, and they have gained confidence, but they overplay their hand in terms of excess use of force against civilians. I think there is a need of cooling of heads and then bring in mediators to really find a form of a government of national unity to deal with key issues, how to rebuild institutions of good governance. The Electoral Commission need to be transformed. They have to deal with a common position on economic policy of the country to attract foreign investment. So Zimbabwe is indeed open for business, but the business people all over the world are not sure if there is a leadership that could protect their investments and have policies that will have enough energy, for instance, have enough bulk water, infrastructure, the roads, and to deal with that, health issues. And at the moment, we're talking of the lack of currency, hard currency. A country needs a currency. Zimbabwe does not have a strong currency that is backed by something. You have these bonds, things that don't make sense in any economy in the world.
So what would be, I don't know, political gains for both South Africa and Zimbabwe out of this binational commission? If South Africa is saying we can only help as far as we can, what could be a win-win situation so that both leaders can come away from the table and saying this was a good gathering?
I think South Africa has a critical role to play in Zimbabwe. It is in South Africa's interest to ensure that Zimbabwe stabilizes. I think South Africa is also being supported by other neighboring countries. I think all SADC countries are united in terms of supporting the government in power at the moment. They have accepted the elections. I think the question will be to bring in the opposition into the fold to ensure that there is stability at the political level and move and deal with critical issues such as currency and ensure that Zimbabwe has enough food, as well as fight at the global level for the lifting of sanctions. These sanctions are just a case of madness. They are not taking Zimbabwe anywhere. They are not helping civilians. As a matter of fact, they are making life difficult for ordinary Zimbabweans.
Describe these sanctions. So, you know, when people talk about sanctions, particularly here in this country, the idea of sanctions is about boycotting goods. You're not allowed to trade with South Africa. What are the sanctions that, these targeted sanctions, been imposed on Zimbabwe and Zimbabweans, individuals, and what effect have they had on the country?
They've had a huge negative impact on the economy. They have targeted quite critical role players, including the president himself and key other players, that they can't move into European countries, they can't go to United States, and as well as some of the SOEs and important key players, state actors. And given the fact that you don't have a viable business environment in
Zimbabwe, is their ability to borrow funds.
To borrow funds at IMF, World Bank, and the debt that is in itself growing. So therefore, Zimbabwe is being forced to pay the debt first before it could borrow more. And in that situation, the economy would not grow.
All right, so very challenging times ahead for Zimbabwe, and we'll see what comes out of this binational commission. Thanks so much indeed for your insights. Always a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.